I just want to let you know, this story is not funny. This story is all about a mother's guilt. So if you've ever experienced a mother's guilt, this is your story. So the summer after my son Abram finished 4th grade, I was in the classroom 3 days after the classrooms were all closed. And I was still going through the closets and putting away papers and filing things and throwing things out. I had taken my 2 youngest sons to the babysitter. Money. But my older son had gotten an invitation to stay at his cousin's house. He was going to spend the night. And all I could think of was, with all this free time, I'm going to be able to close my classroom. And as soon as that is done, the layers of single parenthood, of working 2 jobs, and of being an elementary school teacher are going to fall away one leaf at a time. I was sure, enough hours in that day to finish closing my classroom. And then the phone rang in the office, and I was paged, and I went to answer it, and it was my nephew, Louie's stepfather. And he said, "Deborah, I hate to bother you. I know you're busy, but you need to come to the hospital immediately." And I said, "Tim, I've got about 5 hours left. What's wrong?" And he said, "Well, Abram's had an accident, and you need to be here." I said, "Can I give you the information over the phone?" He said, "Trust me, you're going to want to be here, so come now." And so I closed my classroom door. I told the office clerk, I told the principal, "I swear to you, I will be back. I will come and close the classroom." And I began to drive to the hospital. I began to think of all the things that could have happened. He told me Abram was going to be all right, but I should come immediately. And when I got there and I got to the emergency ward and I told the woman at the desk who I was, she said, "Oh, I'll take you right back." And when she did, there was my son, and there was Tim, my nephew's stepdad. And he was holding Abram's clothes, and they were covered with blood. His shorts were all bloody. His t-shirt was bloody. He handed them over to me, and immediately I felt a mother's guilt. Because immediately I began to grow queasy. I began to grow yellow-bellied, and I had to hold onto a chair. You see, I always wanted to be a nurse, but I was afraid of the sight of blood. And so I couldn't go to nursing school. I wouldn't have lasted not even a week. And so I became an elementary school teacher instead. Now I can clean up vomit, and I can clean up poop, and I can clean up dirty behinds, but I cannot clean up blood. And when I looked at Abram's face, my little 10-year-old with his platinum blonde hair was wide-eyed and terrified. He was crying, and as soon as I saw him, I started to cry too. Tim said to me, "You're going to want to stay with him. I'm going to leave now." And he handed me the bloody clothes, and off he went. And Abram sat there on a gurney in his underwear with a little one of those cover-ups, and his leg was all bandaged, all around his thigh, and it was covered with blood. Blood kept oozing from his wound. And I said, "Well, what happened?" He said, "Well, Mom, I was climbing the tree outside of Louie's, and I slid down, and when I did, I guess I just caught a burr in the bark, and it just hurt, Mom. Will you see if there's any guts coming out of my wound?" I said, "Honey, the wound is covered." He said, "Mom, please." He said, "I know there's guts coming out of my wound. It hurts, Mom, please." And I knew that I was not a good mom. Mea culpa, mea culpa, mea culpa, because I could not look. I started to just grow faint at the thought that I might have to see the wound. And just at that moment, the nurse came in, and she said, "I'm going to change his bandage. The doctor will be along." And she unwound that bloody gauze around his leg, and I got to look. Now let me tell you, it was a great big L in his thigh. The bark on that tree just ripped open a gaping hole, and I was looking at blood and muscle, and the wound was still oozing blood. And my stomach began to turn, and I began to grow faint. I grabbed on the end of the gurney, and I pulled the chair over, and I sat down, and I put my head between my legs. And he said, Mom, can you see my guts? And I said, Abram, I can't see your guts, but I can see a whole lot of other stuff that I don't even want to talk about. I started to cry, and he did too. And just at the moment, the doctor came in. And the doctor said, now, ma'am, do we have to bring a gurney in for you? And I said, I hope not, doctor. But I'm telling you right now, I do not like blood. And then I looked at Abram and I said, honey, there is no guts because guts don't come out of your leg. And he said, oh, okay, Mom, but what does it look like? And I said, well, honey, it looks like a big gaping hole that I hope that they can fix. And he started to cry again, and I started to cry, and the doctor came over to me, and he said, it's going to be okay. It's going to be just fine. And when he said that, I put my head between my legs, and I took a deep breath, and I waited. And then the doctor took out of some back area the hugest needle I have ever seen. The second reason I didn't become a nurse was because I'm afraid of needles. And so when he brought that needle out and I knew that he was going to be sticking it in my son's thigh, the only thing I could do was cry. And Abram cried too. And after a while, the legs started to numb, and Abram began to talk, and he told me what happened. He told me about climbing trees and sliding down and trying to beat his cousin Louie. And the doctor said, it's time to do the stitching. And Abram began to cry again. And I said, honey, don't cry. Think about something else. The whole time my face was facing the window because I couldn't look at the stitching. And so my son began to tell a story. He began to tell a story that the librarian had told them on the last day of school. And he began to tell that story, and he talked about the big, beautiful moon and the skunk who was in love with the man in the moon, and how she pined to go up to the man in the moon and to stroke his face. And he began to tell that story, and the doctor who was stitching stopped stitching. And he looked at my son, and then he looked at me, and he said, how does he know this story? I said, let's ask him. Abram, how do you know this story? And he said, well, the librarian read it on the last day of school. And I just remember it, Mommy. And when the doctor was done, 35 stitches later, I got to take my son home. And in the car, I said to him, Abram, maybe one day you'll be a storyteller just like Mom. And he said, no, Mom, I'm already a storyteller. Maybe one day I'll be a beekeeper just like Dad. 10 years plus 8 years later, my son is exactly that. He's a beekeeper just like his dad.